Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with the final chapter of Bloodties. With a handful of Avengers trying to quell the violence in the streets of Genosha's capital, and Professor Xavier leading the rescue of sick mutates from a concentration camp, the X-Men take the fight to the followers of Fabian Cortez. He, however, has taken to the sewers with Luna Maximoff as hostage. Her parents Quicksilver and Crystal, along with Scarlet Witch and Jean Grey, are given only one path to the child's safe return: the death of Exodus. Avengers number 369 is written by Bob Harris with art by Steve Epting, Jan Duursema, Tom Palmer, and Mike Rockwitz. The cover is silver foil featuring Exodus dead center posturing, while Quicksilver and Crystal are each on one knee holding hands. It actually looks a lot less like the conclusion to a big story and more like a wedding being officiated at a comic book convention. Not exactly sure why they went this route for it, though. Doesn't seem to be a special anniversary issue. Maybe they were just really amped for the conclusion. Anyway, the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier is headed towards Genosha when Nick Fury receives telemetry on their destination, which he passes on to Black Widow, who then responds they'd best pray for the world. 7 minutes ago, a strange force field engulfed the entire island, cutting it off from the rest of the world. Around that time, Exodus made his appearance in the sewers before Fabian Cortez, who still clutches Luna Maximoff, much to the distress of the girl's parents, Aunt Wanda, and Jean Grey. Though I think there's a coloring mistake. Someone seems to have colored Cortez's shirt the same as his skin, but was clearly meant to have a different outline and texture. Way to go, artists. Now he's gonna catch cold. Though, given the narration, they've all been standing there for 7 minutes not doing anything. At some point it stops being a tense moment and just becomes loitering. Cortez says it's too late now, the hero should have listened to him, and Exodus is a significantly greater threat. The head acolyte pleads for common ground, but that just makes Fabian charge his hand to further threaten Luna. Pietro attempts to intervene, but Exodus stops him in his tracks, saying he's Magneto's only true heir now, given how the Maximoff twins long ago forsook their father's ambitions. Wanda holds back Crystal for Luna's safety as Exodus approaches Cortez, taking over his motor functions to retrieve Luna and unleashing a decisive psychic attack that seems to kill Fabian, if not just lobotomizing him. With Magneto avenged of this former acolyte's betrayal, Exodus decides to keep his master's granddaughter, claiming the rest of his flesh and blood family abrogated their rights, and, like Magneto would want, intends to make all of Genosha pay for its sins. Topside, Trish Tilby, reporter and on-again, off-again girlfriend of Hank McCoy, is covering the end of one battle among many in Hammer Bay, as the X-Men have worked to protect the human government officials from mutate assault, despite being the ones that passed the oppressive legislation. They also apprehend some mutates, one of whom is in a teeth-gnashing contest with Bishop, while another argues with Gambit. Cyclops tells Trish that Beast is around, somewhere, when they finally notice how weird the sky is looking, informed that it was Exodus's doing by the arriving Avengers, who look like they're about to attack. I mean, War Machine's helmet always looks like that, and Cersei looks more like she's just going with the flow, but Cap and Black Knight seriously look ticked off and ready to punch someone. This makes more sense as a generic poster than a progression of the scene. Narration informs that the last time these two teams met, they fought over Magneto's rights in the Extinction Agenda storyline. And even though Crystal's daughter may have been the catalyst for the Avengers' involvement, they were still morally outraged by the violence on the island. And, hey, Gambit, Rogue's eyes are up there, to your left. She can see you checking out Cersei. But I digress. The field appeared shortly after Exodus's fight with Cersei, and is also blocking their communications with the outside world. Standing beside Captain America, Storm tells them all that regardless of past differences, how Luna is not the only link between the teams, but a reminder that they share a great deal in their histories, the best option now is to join forces and end the bloodshed. She and War Machine start by checking out the barrier, Noticing that while air currents are slower to heed the Wind Rider's commands, Rhodey's scanners aren't picking up any kind of energy signature. Believing the field to be an illusion, James flies into it only to be repelled back, now with disabled circuitry. Foolish, foolish man. Curiosity has killed more than a cat in its day.
Oi! Save now, scold later! Though she has a point. Wouldn't it have made more sense to throw something solid at the barrier first? A rock, a dud grenade, or maybe a bolt of lightning or energy blast to check for some kind of reaction?
Ororo catches him, though nearly losing her arm in the process, but can't slow their descent because of the sluggish winds. Fortunately, Cersei arrives and they make a safe landing. Rhodes admits he chose his actions poorly and now his defensive systems are shot, but his scanners really didn't pick anything up. Storm suggests the barrier could be psionic, which wouldn't be detected by most scanning devices, but could potentially interfere with her weather manipulation. Exodus being telekinetic makes sense given his fight with Cersei, and that's when they're simultaneously hit by an urgent psychic emoji from Professor Xavier. The Beast and I are in danger. Hundreds of innocents are threatened. Oh, and a knockoff Captain America. Hey!
You know what you are!
Come at once, if you can. Yeah, that's a face that says, get here when it's convenient, doesn't it, folks? The angry faces keep rolling as Scott orders Iceman to stay behind and tend to the wounded with Revenge, whom we've seen very sparsely in the story, but nowhere in this issue. They leave with the Avengers, except War Machine, I guess, but Gambit stays behind briefly, thinking Bobby seems upset. He is, because Psyche still treats him like a goofy teenager, and I'm not sure why we get this moment. It doesn't seem to be built up much or serve much purpose to the overall story. We jump to Charlie and the Beast, coming this fall to NBC, as we see U.S. Agent Philip, losing that second L, his apparent love interest Jen, and now Henry Peter Gyrick from out of nowhere.
You know, I'm not really sure if they just keep forgetting about this subplot with Xavier and this third faction in the war, or they have so much going on with the X-Men and Avengers proper that they neglect to detail it. Gyrick just appeared as suddenly as Phil and Jen did in the previous issue in the last episode. What next? Are the Fantastic Four going to suddenly show up? Why not Batman? He's everywhere already.
How about Chuck Norris with a BB gun?
The group and the mutate prisoners are pinned down by magistrate forces, too well psi-shielded in their great numbers for the world's greatest telepath to attack. As Agent tries to alleviate Gyrick's worry about his imminent death protecting mutants, Charles's friend and third-party rebel leader Renee, who's also here suddenly because shut-up reasons, is shot. Fortunately, it's right after that, on a second consecutive two-page spread, the combined X-Men and Avengers burst onto the scene as the much-needed cavalry, taking the fight to the magistrate.
We could combine our team names to something, I don't know, like, the Uncanny Avengers. Nah, that'd never work.
And while I've never been much of a follower of the Avengers, it's really fun to watch these teams fight together. Granted, there are some lost details here and there, but there are some little things that I do enjoy about this, like the lighting effect of Bishop's blaster and the fun banter, like Rogue telling a pilot about her last trip to Genosha as she destroys his plane. After some multi-page ads for a Punisher storyline and something involving the New Warriors, Captain America has it confirmed for him that they're escaping a bona fide concentration camp, so the Star-Spangled Man fights with greater ferocity. That's something I'd like to see elaborated upon in more panels, but the Magistrate starts falling back. Archangel and Rogue begin taking the injured to a nearby campsite as Chuck is told of Exodus' presence and how Jean, along with Magneto's family, have gone off on their own. Rogue returns for another delivery when the professor warns she'll be wanted as well, and she suddenly falls from the air. It was another attack from Exodus, whom we join back in the sewers, striking at the Southern Belle for having spurned Magneto's affections in the past.
Dude, this is why your dating service never took off. Very few customers want bad dates to end up in psychically forced comas.
Pietro insists that his father's lackey is little more than a sycophant, too afraid of living his own life and thinking his own thoughts. so he latches entirely to someone else's. That apparently strikes a nerve, or maybe Exodus thinks it would have hit one of Magneto's, as he psionically increases Quicksilver's already increased metabolism. Wanda tells him to man up and just kill them quickly, and the Acolyte says their deaths, and that of the island's populace, will be offered as a testament to Eric Lencher's suffering. We briefly cut back to the helicarrier closing in on the island, with Black Widow noting how gracious Fury has been since the brawl with S.H.I.E.L.D. at the Avengers Mansion. "Hey, come on, Widow Lady. You know a tussle does the boys good every now and then."
Sure, their doctors don't agree with that, but what do they know?
So the Avengers quit the UN, but wasn't S.H.I.E.L.D. under orders to stop them? Nick didn't like it, but he was still following orders, so what changed? Is he defying orders or following new ones? No one in the comic asks the question, so why provide an answer, right? Their scans show no energy to the barrier, but Vision calculates that it's reduced in size by 14% since it materialized, meaning it's a weapon intended to crush the island and its people. Meanwhile, Rogue is still breathing after Exodus's telepathic assault, meaning he's much more powerful than Charles thought upon their first encounter. The flattered extremist arrives, with Jean and the others under his control, announcing to the mutates that Magneto is alive, but recovering from serious wounds. In the meantime, Exodus acts as his voice, his eyes, and executor of his will, even repeating his line about being heir in spirit if not in body from before. Seeing Genosha as a blight to Magnus's teachings, the island will be crushed unless all humans are slaughtered. And somehow Xavier sees this as a boy seeking to fill a giant's shoes, which may be the key to their salvation.
All right then. We'll try jiggling keys. If that doesn't work, we'll put them in timeout. And if that doesn't work, I've got my backup super-sized jiggling keys.
Weird thing is, Exodus doesn't seem to be bellowing or yelling or anything, just speaking normally for him. But the ones in closest proximity are the X-Men, Avengers, and recently saved prisoners, the ones that we really haven't seen in a while. Maybe he's also giving this ultimatum telepathically, because we see shadowed figures begin to rise up, wanting to slay flat scans, their fears being amplified by the self-described savior to drive them to murder. The professor thinks that even though time is running out, that may also work in their favor. Captain America suggests splitting their focus. One group prevents a bloodbath, while the other takes on Magneto's right-hand mutant. And Revanche is suddenly there. Wasn't she supposed to hang back some distance with Bobby? They haven't really given much geographical context, but still, where'd she come from?
I'm not really familiar with Revanche or Revanche or however that's supposed to be pronounced, but I'm pretty sure her powers don't involve just popping up in random places like Nightcrawler after someone spiked the communion wine.
As the protection team goes to stop the mutates they just freed from killing humans, Xavier elaborates to his activist companions that their animosity was always present, but Exodus is merely amplifying it, even though his powers can only be stretched so far. Bobby gets to punch people, Renee talks at Revanche, and either that's a typo or U.S. agent thinks her surname is Majcoomb. Must be a typo because Iceman calls her the same thing on the next page, however he knows her. And hilariously enough, Revanche, who got maybe one kick in this entire adventure of being seen more rarely than Waldo, has been taken down by Cortez's Unforgiven, now working in Exodus's name.
Blood ties, where things happen.
Team Punch the Fascist launches their attack, only to be cast aside, while their allies are held in a telekinetic bubble. I figured when they said that Jean and the group were all in Exodus's thrall, that meant he'd be controlling them, having them fight each other, but I guess not. After the Acolyte again gloats about he's the true successor to Magneto, attention is called to the sky where the dome begins to collapse on some of the city's towers. Black Knight begins slowly moving in, with Charles stating their enemy is nearing his limit. "I still see humans alive! Have you no faith?"
If you're not going to kill humans more quickly, maybe I'll just leave you all uncrushed and go home. Maybe I'll give up my child hostage while I'm at it. Let's see some murderous fundamentals, people!
Exodus raises Luna up, labeling her humanity an abomination to Magneto's lineage, and the scene becomes kind of horrifically quiet as narration intercedes. It appropriately illustrates the emotions compounding the mood alongside the visuals of horrified parents and their frightened child. A second, perhaps two, is all the time Charles Xavier has. A second, perhaps two, is all the time Charles Xavier needs. He launches an intense psychic blast, but not with the debilitating effect one would hope, as Exodus saw it coming.
Didn't even drop my hostage. Look, Ma, one-handed!
He was not, however, expecting an assault from the Black Knight, his Nero sword overloading his psi power's already taxed system, and he falls. Dane catches Luna, holding her long enough for her parents to embrace their child once again. Well, Crystal, anyway. Pietro doesn't look as happy as he should. Like, even remotely. I know he's been a moody doofus this whole story, but this is the time for him to remove the stick. Professor X begins a monologue about how humans and mutants need to learn to coexist, or the whole world will end up as ravaged as Genosha. What the mutates suffered was horrendous, but it was no excuse for their murderous intent. Cutting down innocent lives in the streets grants freedom to no one. Not only have they become as bad as their oppressors, they chose to follow one who would slaughter small children. Where is the glory in that? Where is the humanity? Where, finally, is your great moral victory?
One sec, let me ask my Twitter followers.
The barrier falls, and Exodus gets to his feet, told by Chuck that he's too young and overly proud of his powers, and how his downfall came from Jean secretly probing his defenses and relaying the info back to Xavier. Exodus takes it in stride, claiming his youth means he can refine his abilities to become the leader of the new generation, while the professor declines and fades away. He leaves, but not before attacking Quicksilver with heat vision?
Can he do that? I forget if he can do that. This isn't like Dragon Ball Z where you see a character use laser beams from their eyes once and then for the rest of the series they completely forget they can do that.
Oh, right. Psionic eye blasts. Silly me, I forgot. Pietro isn't breathing, and Dane furiously begins chest compressions, but to no avail. Except it was totally to a whole bunch of avail because he's okay. Quicksilver's a bit weak, but almost cracks a smile as he gets to hold his daughter, and Crystal thanks her fellow Avenger. The epilogue is set the day after war, as the helicarrier is prepped to deliver supplies and rations to Genoshans in need. Captain America and Charles Xavier watch from across the shore as Jennifer Ransom approaches, she being the mutant activist you might have forgotten about since she said she was a mutate, but never really showed off her powers or did anything. Anyway, she calls Charles a hypocrite, since his speech was nice, but he's still a powerful mutant that's kept his abilities secret from the world. Cap steps up to defend the prof, but Charles feels she has every right to be offended. It was simpler when he started the X-Men, feeling a human advocate for mutants worked in the best interest of his students and the dream of a unified world. But now, he is not so sure. The story concludes with Captain America saying that in a world where people find any excuse to hate and kill each other, how can anyone be sure of anything?
And that was Bloodties. And for all the potential in its premise, it had a lot of hiccups along the way.
As a follow-up to Fatal Attractions and the nullifying of Magneto's brain for a while, it's a great idea, and involving Luna Maximoff plays nicely into that. The uncertainty of Magneto and his presence or his plans to everyone in the world except the X-Men, as well as possibly being influenced by real-life events in Bosnia at the time, Genosha made sense as a backdrop to the various events at work. But all these subplots going on kind of worked against it. None of the events felt all that interconnected until the last chapter, mostly akin to different events occurring at the same time by coincidence. Maybe there was some payoff to the Black Knight recognizing Exodus and the big mystery surrounding him, but it wasn't here. Then you have Xavier's side quest to liberate the concentration camp. He separates from his main UN envoy, meets up with a bunch of freedom fighters that never show up again except for Renee, U.S. agent sneaks along, apparently unaffected by this sudden change in plans to someone he's supposed to be escorting, and the others in the envoy just up and appear with no context.
It was kind of like how Revenge just suddenly popped up, didn't really do anything except kick a guy, and then immediately got knocked out. Except Gyric's envoy did a lot more and actually had dialogue. Yet somehow Philip and Jen seemed much more forgettable.
I know I mentioned that stuff earlier in the review, but, well, this comic got pretty repetitive with some of its dialogue, so why shouldn't I? Then you have the Avengers' squabble with the UN. The team is understandably mad that they aren't doing anything to help Genosha, and that they had S.H.I.E.L.D. sicked on them to keep them in line, and after some false tension, Black Widow just ends their charter. Maybe it would have had more impact for me if I was current on the Avengers comics at the time, but this doesn't explain why Fury, who was so adamant about following his orders to stay out, just chaperones the Earth's mightiest heroes to the island he previously tried keeping them away from. And beyond that, the whole argument of whether or not the team should go isn't really a debate or an argument, it's just a one-sided thing. It didn't provide enough substantial conflict to feel appropriately tense or even all that interesting.
Don't get me wrong, I prefer superheroes to stop wholesale slaughter whenever possible, but they didn't even get that much resistance besides, "It's a civil matter concerning Genoshans, nothing we can do about it."
The way I see it, either the UN didn't have the kind of conviction to justify their passive stance, or none of the writers thought it was necessary to give an opposing view. Not so much to validate the violence, but rather because there would be someone against interfering in sovereign affairs, despite possibly having understandable reasons, and Widow, Hawkeye, anyone would need to respond.
The third Captain America movie asked a very similar question, and while it wasn't answered definitively, they at least let you see where each side was coming from. Maybe the writers didn't exactly want this story to be that in-depth, because it really feels like the UN was more of a mild inconvenience.
And I have to question Cortez's plan. He's scared of Magneto, so he decides to start a bloody uprising in an island nation known for mutant enslavement. As a get-out-of-magnetic doom-free card, he has one of his goons abduct his grandchild. Like that wouldn't just make Magneto angrier. If Eric weren't a blank slate, I imagine he could descend upon Genosha with a welcoming facade, insist on holding his grandkid, and either get the child back, or have the populace turn on Fabian when he refuses. And beyond that, Cortez wouldn't have much to fear from Exodus, who'd still be at Magnus's command. And heck, even Exodus's threat level kept fluctuating, more so than the color of Luna's onesie. He's supposed to be an oh-so-scary, powerful guy, but his attacks on War Machine and Rogue failed to do what he'd intended. Heck, even Fabian couldn't stay down. He just popped up again a few years later, and it was only implied that Mr. Sinister may have been responsible.
Unfortunately, they never explain why Cortez couldn't use his powers in defense against Exodus. Was he just so powerful that his psionics couldn't be dampened to safe levels? And if Fabian's powers work by altering levels of mutant power output, would they even work on a human at all to any capacity? Dangerous or otherwise? And who was changing Luna's diapers during all this?
I feel they did go a little overboard with the 2-page spreads, but at least they felt full and somewhat justified, not just extreme close-ups or filler. Yet the horizontal format didn't feel that necessary in its own frequency. The art wasn't bad, but I will say that there were some coloring errors here and there, like Scythe's armor colored red instead of silver, and moments where things were either very crowded by characters and dialogue or blended into the background, becoming unnoticeable. Then you have the lack of location specifics, and some characters just popping up wherever, whenever, or in some cases just not doing or saying anything. These scenes lend themselves to some confusion. And would it have killed Pietro to smile more when his child was rescued? Does he think he's in one of the DC movies?
When all is said and done, Bloodties had a lot going for it, and worked as a means of getting together two of Marvel's biggest teams. But it did seem like they lost focus along the way, and that risks hurting the overall message Xavier's always tried to get across. Next week, Year of the Crossover continues, when one of my favorite comic book characters teams up with someone I know absolutely nothing about. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.